Welcome back to True Stories, where we bring you remarkable moments that remind us about the power of kindness and standing up for what's right. Before we dive into today's touching story, make sure to comment where you're watching from. We love hearing from our global family of viewers. On a chilly morning in London's East End, Sarah Martinez stood in her small apartment kitchen, trying to keep her hands from shaking as she made breakfast for her children. The eviction notice on the counter seemed to mock her efforts to maintain normalcy. After losing her job due to illness and falling 3 months behind on rent, the single mother of two was facing her worst nightmare. But sometimes help comes from the most unexpected places, and this ordinary morning was about to become extraordinary. The apartment building, a weathered brick structure that had seen better days, stood quietly in the early morning light. Its worn facade told stories of countless families who had called it home over the decades, though now many of its residents faced similar struggles in London's increasingly unaffordable housing market. Sarah's third-floor window offered a view of the neighborhood where she had grown up, where she had hoped to raise her own children. 8-year-old Maya and 6-year-old Lucas sat at their small kitchen table, their school uniforms neat despite being hand-me-downs, their faces showing the innocent trust of children who still believed their mother could fix anything. Sarah managed to give them a reassuring smile as she served their cereal, hiding the worry that had kept her awake through another sleepless night. The morning light filtered through thin curtains, catching the dust motes in the air and illuminating the few family photos on the walls. These images told the story of happier times, before Sarah's illness, before the medical bills, before she had to choose between buying medicine and paying rent. The apartment might have been modest, but Sarah had always managed to make it feel like home. Outside, the neighborhood was beginning to stir. The sound of delivery trucks and early morning commuters created a familiar symphony that had once been comforting but now carried an edge of anxiety. Each passing hour brought Sarah closer to the moment she had been dreading, the landlord's final visit, scheduled for that morning. Maya, the older of the two children, watched her mother with eyes that seemed too understanding for her age. She had overheard enough phone conversations, seen enough bills marked in red, to know that something was wrong. But like her mother, she tried to maintain a brave face for her younger brother's sake. The apartment's walls held the warmth of a home well-loved, children's artwork, carefully maintained furniture, small touches that spoke of a family's life. Sarah had worked hard to create this haven for her children, taking extra shifts at the hospital where she had worked as a nurse before her illness forced her to stop. Now all of that was in danger of being lost. Lucas finished his cereal and asked for more, his simple request making Sarah's heart ache. There wasn't much left, the cupboards were getting bare, and her pride had kept her from asking for help for too long. She divided her own portion between her children's bowls, telling them she had already eaten, another small lie in a growing collection of necessary deceptions. The sound of footsteps on the building's main staircase made Sarah's heart race. It was too early for the landlord's scheduled visit, but every noise now carried the threat of impending loss. She tried to focus on getting her children ready for school, maintaining the routine that gave their lives structure and normalcy. Maya helped her brother pack his school bag, showing the kind of responsibility that made Sarah both proud and sad. Children shouldn't have to grow up so quickly, shouldn't have to understand the weight of adult worries. But circumstances had forced them all to adapt, to become stronger than they should have needed to be. The morning continued its inexorable march forward, each tick of the kitchen clock bringing them closer to the appointed time. Sarah had already packed some essentials, just in case, though she tried to keep the bags hidden from her children's sight. The thought of explaining to them why they might need to leave their home was almost unbearable. Outside their window, the city continued its busy rhythm, unaware of the drama unfolding in one small apartment. The contrast between the normal morning activities of their neighbors and the crisis facing Sarah's family made their situation feel even more isolating. How many other families in the building, in the neighborhood, were facing similar struggles? Maya and Lucas finished their breakfast, carrying their bowls to the sink with the careful movements of children who understood that replacements weren't easily affordable. Sarah helped them with their coats, checking their school bags one last time, trying to focus on these normal morning tasks instead of the growing knot in her stomach. The building's old pipes creaked and groaned, familiar sounds that had become part of the background music of their lives. Sarah wondered how many more mornings she would hear these sounds, how many more familiar creaks and settling noises would mark their daily routines. The thought of leaving this place, of uprooting her children from the only home they had known, was almost unbearable. A door slammed somewhere in the building, making Sarah jump slightly. Her nerves were frayed from weeks of anxiety, from trying to maintain a brave face while watching their security crumble. The children noticed her reaction but said nothing, their silence more telling than any words could have been. The morning light had strengthened now, highlighting the worn spots on the carpet, the places where paint had begun to peel. These imperfections, which had once seemed like minor annoyances, now felt like accusations, visible signs of her inability to maintain the life she wanted for her children. Sarah helped Lucas with his shoelaces, her hands steady despite her inner turmoil. These small moments of mothering, tying shoes, straightening collars, checking homework, had become precious now that their future was so uncertain. Each routine task carried the weight of possibly being one of the last times in this familiar space. Maya stood by the window, her school bag ready, watching the street below with unusual intensity. Perhaps she was looking for the landlord, or maybe she was just trying to memorize the view she had known all her life. Sarah wanted to tell her everything would be okay, but the words stuck in her throat. She had always taught her children to be honest, and right now, she couldn't make promises she wasn't sure she could keep. The sound of a car door slamming in the street below made both Sarah and Maya turn. It wasn't the landlord's usual vehicle, but every arrival now carried the potential for confrontation. Sarah checked her watch, still an hour before the scheduled meeting. She needed to get the children to school before then, wanted to spare them from witnessing whatever was about to happen. Lucas asked if they could play in the park after school, his innocent question piercing Sarah's heart. How could she explain that their afternoon plans might need to change dramatically? That their whole lives might be different by the time the school day ended? She managed a non-committal response, hating herself for the growing collection of half-truths and evasions. The morning had reached that crucial point where they needed to leave for school, but Sarah found herself moving slower than usual, trying to stretch these moments in their home. Maya seemed to understand, taking extra time to check her reflection in the hallway mirror, to adjust the photos on the wall, small gestures that spoke volumes about her awareness of the situation. Sarah gathered her children's lunch boxes, simple sandwiches and apples, the best she could manage with their dwindling resources. She had skipped her own lunch preparation, another small sacrifice in a long line of maternal choices. The money saved might not make a difference in their overall situation, but every penny counted now. The building's ancient radiator clanked to life, sending a wave of warmth through the apartment. Sarah had always complained about its noisy performance, but now the sound felt comforting, familiar, part of the home she was fighting to keep. How many more mornings would they wake to these familiar sounds, these small domestic symphonies? Maya helped her brother with his coat buttons, showing the kind of caring that made Sarah's eyes fill with tears. Her children had grown so much in the past few months, not just in height but in understanding, in compassion, in their quiet acceptance of their changing circumstances. She wished she could have protected them from this growth, allowed them to remain innocent a little longer. The morning light caught Maya's face as she turned to her mother, highlighting a maturity that shouldn't have been there at 8 years old. "It's time to go, Mum," she said softly, her voice carrying a gentleness that suggested she was trying to comfort her mother as much as state a fact. Sarah nodded, gathering her own coat and keys, each movement feeling heavy with significance. As they prepared to leave the apartment, she couldn't help but wonder if this would be the last time they walked through these rooms as their home. The thought made her pause at the door, taking one last look at the space that held so many memories. Little did Sarah know that as she led her children down the building stairs, their lives were about to intersect with someone who would change everything. Sometimes help arrives in the most unexpected ways, and this morning was about to become a testament to the power of human kindness and courage in the face of adversity. As Sarah and her children made their way down the worn stairs of their apartment building, Jason Statham was parking his car on the street outside. The action star had been visiting his old neighborhood, reconnecting with the streets where he had grown up, when the scene before him caught his attention. His trained eye, developed through years of reading situations both on and off screen, noticed the subtle signs of distress in the young mother's posture as she hurried her children along. Statham sat quietly in his car for a moment, watching as Sarah guided her children toward the street. He was dressed casually in a black leather jacket and jeans, his presence deliberately understated. Growing up in these same streets had taught him to read the signs of struggle, to recognize the quiet dignity of people facing hard times. Something about the small family's careful movements spoke to him of a story he needed to understand. The morning had grown slightly warmer, but there was still a chill in the air that made Sarah pull her children's coats tighter around them. From his vantage point, Statham noticed the careful way she checked their school uniforms, the loving attention that spoke of a mother trying to maintain normalcy in the face of crisis. His own childhood memories of similar moments stirred something in him. As Sarah and her children reached the sidewalk, another car pulled up to the building. The driver's expensive suit and impatient manner marked him clearly as someone with authority, likely the landlord Sarah had been dreading. Statham's instincts, honed through years of both acting and real-life experience, told him he was about to witness something significant. The landlord, a man named James Wheeler, stepped out of his luxury car with the confidence of someone used to having his way. His presence seemed to cast a shadow over the morning, despite the strengthening sunlight. Sarah's steps faltered slightly as she saw him, her arm tightening protectively around her children's shoulders. Statham remained in his car, observing the scene with growing concern. His childhood in this neighborhood had taught him about the struggles of working families, about the thin line between stability and crisis. The controlled panic in Sarah's movements as she tried to hurry her children past the landlord reminded him of his own mother's similar moments of quiet desperation. Wheeler's voice carried across the morning air, sharp and impatient. "Mrs. Martinez, I believe we have an appointment this morning." His tone carried no sympathy, no recognition of the two children who had frozen at their mother's side. Maya and Lucas pressed closer to Sarah, sensing her tension even if they didn't fully understand its cause. The morning traffic continued its usual flow, creating a backdrop of city noise that seemed to emphasize the human drama unfolding on the sidewalk. Statham watched as Sarah tried to maintain her composure, explaining that she needed to get her children to school first. Her voice carried the strain of someone trying to hold together a world that was threatening to fall apart. Wheeler's response was dismissive, his gesture toward his watch deliberately intimidating. "I have other properties to visit. We're doing this now." The threat in his voice was clear, though carefully maintained within the bounds of professional discourse. Sarah's face showed the conflict between her need to protect her children from this moment and her fear of making the situation worse. It was then that Statham decided to step out of his car. His movements were deliberate, measured, carrying the same presence that had made him a successful action star. But this wasn't about celebrity or dramatically saving the day. This was about something more fundamental, about standing up for what was right. The morning sun caught the leather of his jacket as he approached the small group, his footsteps quiet but purposeful on the London pavement. Wheeler noticed him first, his expression changing slightly as he registered the presence of someone who didn't fit his expected script for this morning's business. Sarah had managed to position herself between Wheeler and her children, her protective instinct overriding her fear. Maya and Lucas watched the scene with wide eyes, too young to fully understand the situation but old enough to sense its importance. The morning light caught the tears threatening to fall from Sarah's eyes, though she fought to hold them back. Statham's approach was casual but deliberate, his presence already changing the dynamic of the confrontation. His childhood in these streets had taught him the importance of timing, of knowing exactly when to step into a situation. The muscles developed through years of action films were hidden beneath his casual wear, but there was no mistaking the quiet authority in his movements. Wheeler's confident stance had faltered slightly, something in Statham's approach making him reassess his position. The action star's reputation preceded him, not just as a celebrity but as someone known for his straightforward manner and strong sense of justice. The morning light caught the uncertainty that had crept into Wheeler's expression. Sarah noticed Statham's approach with a mixture of confusion and desperate hope. Like many residents of the neighborhood, she recognized him immediately, not just as a movie star, but as a local boy who had made good. His presence seemed to pause the moment, creating a space where the inevitable might not be so inevitable after all. Maya and Lucas had also recognized Statham, their eyes widening with the pure amazement that only children can show. Their reaction brought a slight smile to the action star's face, though his focus remained on the larger situation. The morning traffic continued around them, but this small section of sidewalk had become its own world. Wheeler cleared his throat, attempting to maintain his authority despite the unexpected presence of a celebrity. His expensive suit and carefully styled hair suddenly seemed less impressive, less intimidating in the face of Statham's authentic presence. The morning sun highlighted the contrast between Wheeler's artificial confidence and Statham's genuine authority. The action star's voice, when he finally spoke, carried the same quiet power that had made him famous, though now it was directed at something more important than any film scene. His words were careful, measured, but carried an underlying strength that made Wheeler take an unconscious step backward. Sarah stood straighter, drawing strength from the unexpected support. Her children pressed close to her sides, their school bags clutched tightly, watching the scene unfold with the intense focus of young minds trying to understand adult situations. The morning light caught the hope beginning to dawn in their mother's eyes. Statham's position now effectively separated Wheeler from the small family, though his stance remained casual, non-threatening. His presence had changed the power dynamic of the situation without any need for dramatic gestures or loud confrontations. The quiet authority he projected spoke of someone who understood both power and responsibility. The street had grown busier with morning traffic, but the scene on the sidewalk remained in its own bubble of tension and possibility. Wheeler's expensive watch caught the light as he checked the time, a nervous gesture that betrayed his discomfort with the situation's unexpected turn. His usual script for handling difficult tenants hadn't prepared him for this. Statham's childhood memories of similar moments, of families facing crisis on these very streets, fueled his quiet determination to intervene. His success had given him the power to make a difference, but it was his connection to this neighborhood, to these struggles, that guided his actions now. The morning sun had risen higher, eliminating the shadows that had made Wheeler's presence seem so threatening earlier. In the clear light, the situation seemed to crystallize, not just a landlord evicting a family, but a moment where humanity and compassion could prevail over cold business calculations. Sarah's attempts to maintain composure for her children's sake touched something deep in Statham's heart. His own mother had shown similar strength during difficult times, and now he had the power to ensure this mother wouldn't face her struggles alone. The morning light caught the tears she was still trying to hold back, but now they seemed more like tears of hope than desperation. The street continued its morning rhythm around them, but this small drama had begun to draw attention from passers-by. Some recognized Statham, others simply sensed they were witnessing something important. The morning light created an almost theatrical setting for what was about to become a powerful reminder about standing up for what's right. Jason Statham's voice carried a quiet authority as he addressed the landlord. "Mr. Wheeler, isn't it?" he said, his words measured and calm. "Why don't we discuss this situation like reasonable people?" The action star's presence had transformed the sidewalk confrontation into something different, something where raw power had to give way to human consideration. Wheeler attempted to maintain his professional demeanor, though his confidence had clearly been shaken. "This is a private business matter, Mr. Statham. I appreciate your concern, but..." The landlord's words trailed off as Statham took a small step forward, his movement subtle but significant. "You know," Statham said, his voice carrying the weight of someone who knew these streets intimately, "I grew up not far from here. Saw a lot of families struggling, saw a lot of people who thought business was more important than humanity." His eyes never left Wheeler's face as he spoke, each word delivered with precise impact. Sarah stood protectively near her children, watching the exchange with a mixture of hope and anxiety. Maya and Lucas remained close to their mother, their eyes wide as they witnessed their action hero idol standing up for their family. The morning sun caught the tears that had begun to dry on Sarah's cheeks. "Mrs. Martinez has been a tenant here for 5 years, Statham continued, his tone reasonable but firm. "Never missed a payment until her illness. Sometimes life throws people curves they didn't expect. The question is, what kind of person does that bring out in us?" The philosophical turn of his words caught Wheeler off guard. The landlord shifted uncomfortably, his expensive shoes scuffing against the London pavement. There are procedures, regulations. The market demands. Once again, Statham's quiet voice cut through the excuses. The market? Statham asked, a hint of steel entering his voice. Let's talk about the market. Let's talk about what happens to neighborhoods when we forget they're made of people, not just property values. His words carried the authenticity of someone who had lived this reality, not just observed it. A small crowd had begun to gather, drawn by the presence of the action star but staying to witness something more meaningful. Some had their phones out recording the scene, but Statham's focus remained entirely on the matter at hand. This wasn't about creating a viral moment, it was about doing what was right. Here's what's going to happen, Statham said, reaching into his jacket pocket. We're going to work out a payment plan that makes sense for everyone. One that remembers we're dealing with a family, not just a ledger entry. He pulled out his phone, his movements deliberate and purposeful. Wheeler's professional facade had begun to crack, revealing the uncertainty beneath. The presence of witnesses, the quiet authority of Statham's words, and perhaps his own conscience had begun to affect him. His next words came out less confident, more hesitant. The arrears are significant. Statham nodded, acknowledging the business reality while refusing to let it be the only consideration. Then let's address them properly. Mrs. Martinez needs time to recover, to get back to work. Her children need stability. Surely we can find a solution that works for everyone. Sarah watched the exchange with growing hope, her arms still protective around her children's shoulders. Maya and Lucas had stopped trembling, drawing strength from the quiet confidence Statham projected. The morning sun seemed brighter somehow, as if nature itself approved of this intervention. I could cover the immediate arrears, Statham offered, his voice matter-of-fact, without any hint of showing off his wealth. Set up a reasonable repayment schedule for Mrs. Martinez once she's back on her feet. Something that keeps a family in their home and maintains your property's value. Seems like good business to me. Wheeler's resistance was visibly weakening. The action star's practical approach, combined with his undeniable presence, had transformed the situation. The morning traffic continued around them, but this small section of sidewalk had become a stage for something important, a moment where humanity confronted the cold calculations of business. The children, Statham continued, gesturing toward Maya and Lucas, they're in school nearby, aren't they? Good schools, stable community. That's worth something too, isn't it? More than just monthly rent payments. His words carried the weight of someone who understood the true value of community. Sarah's voice, when she finally spoke, carried both strength and vulnerability. I've never asked for charity, she said quietly. I just need some time to get back on my feet, to get back to work. Her dignity in the face of crisis seemed to affect Wheeler more than any of the previous arguments. Statham nodded approvingly at her words. There you have it, he said to Wheeler. A responsible tenant who's hit a rough patch. The kind of person who builds stable communities. Isn't that what property owners should want? His logic was as impeccable as his timing had been in arriving at this moment. The morning had grown warmer, but it was more than the temperature that had changed. Wheeler's expression had shifted from bureaucratic dismissal to genuine consideration. The human element of the situation, so easily forgotten in property management spreadsheets, had been brought into sharp focus by Statham's intervention. Perhaps, Wheeler said slowly, we could discuss some kind of arrangement. The words seemed to cost him something, but they also carried a hint of relief, as if he was glad to find a way out of his previous hardline position. Statham's response was immediate and practical. Let's go up to Mrs. Martinez's apartment. Sit down like civilized people and work out the details. Show these children that adults can solve problems with compassion and common sense. His words were an invitation that carried the weight of a command. The small crowd of onlookers had grown, their presence adding weight to the moment. Some were recording on their phones, others simply watching with approval as they witnessed something rare, a moment where celebrity power was used for something genuinely meaningful. Sarah's tears had completely dried now, replaced by a look of cautious hope. Her children stayed close, but their posture had changed from fear to amazement as they watched their action hero idol transform their morning of crisis into something very different. "Mr. Wheeler," Statham said, his voice carrying just a hint of his screen presence, "shall we?" He gestured toward the building's entrance, his movement both an invitation and a gentle instruction. The landlord's nod of agreement marked a turning point, the moment when humanity triumphed over cold business logic. As they moved toward the building's entrance, Statham fell into step beside Sarah and her children. His presence was protective but not overwhelming, offering support while respecting her dignity. The morning sun caught his profile, highlighting the determination in his expression. The small group's journey up the worn stairs carried a different energy now. What had been a march toward eviction had transformed into something else, a path toward solution, toward hope. The children's footsteps were lighter, their mother's posture straighter, as they led the way to their apartment. Wheeler followed, his expensive suit somewhat at odds with the building's modest surroundings. But something had changed in his demeanor too, a softening around the edges, a recognition of the human elements he had been trained to ignore in his business dealings. Statham's quiet authority continued to guide the situation as they reached Sarah's apartment. His presence had changed not just the immediate crisis but potentially the long-term relationship between landlord and tenant. The morning light through the apartment windows seemed to bless the transformation. The action star's next words set the tone for what would follow. "Right then," he said as they gathered in the small living room, "let's work out something that helps everyone." His voice carried the same quiet power that had commanded attention on movie screens worldwide, but now it was directed at something more important than any film. The morning that had started with the threat of eviction was transforming into something very different, a lesson about humanity, about the power of intervention, about the importance of seeing people as more than just entries in a ledger. Statham's presence had catalyzed the change, but it was the basic human dignity of the situation that would make it last. Inside Sarah's modest apartment, the morning light streamed through the windows as Jason Statham guided the conversation toward resolution. The action star's presence had transformed what could have been a tragedy into something else entirely, a moment of human connection and understanding. His simple black leather jacket and jeans stood in stark contrast to Wheeler's expensive suit, but it was Statham's quiet authority that commanded the room. The details of the agreement came together with surprising ease once the human element had been acknowledged. Statham's offer to cover the immediate arrears was structured in a way that preserved Sarah's dignity, not a handout, but a bridge to help a family through difficult times. Wheeler, his earlier rigid stance softened by the morning's events, found himself proposing reasonable terms for future payments. Maya and Lucas sat quietly on their familiar couch, watching with wide-eyed wonder as their action hero idol worked to save their home. Their presence in the room served as a constant reminder of what was really at stake, not just property values and rental payments, but the stability of young lives, the foundation of childhood memories. Sarah's hands had stopped shaking as she reviewed the payment plan Wheeler was sketching out. The terms were more than fair, they were human, acknowledging both her current situation and her proven history as a responsible tenant. The morning sun caught the tears of relief in her eyes, but now they were accompanied by a smile of genuine hope. Statham's approach to the situation revealed something about his character that went beyond his action star persona. His understanding of the neighborhood, his connection to the community's struggles, guided every aspect of the solution he helped craft. This wasn't about a celebrity's grand gesture, it was about neighbors helping neighbors, about remembering what really matters. Wheeler's transformation throughout the morning was perhaps the most remarkable. The landlord's initial bureaucratic distance had given way to genuine engagement with the human situation before him. His expertise in property management was now being applied to finding solutions rather than enforcing regulations, guided by Statham's quiet insistence on doing what was right. The children's school bags still sat by the door, their morning routine interrupted but not destroyed. Statham had noticed them earlier and now suggested that he could arrange for them to be driven to school, ensuring they wouldn't be late. It was a small gesture, but one that showed his understanding of how important routine and normalcy are to children facing uncertainty. As the final details were worked out, the atmosphere in the small apartment had transformed completely. What had started as a morning of crisis had become something else, a reminder of the power of human connection, of the importance of standing up for what's right. The morning light seemed to bless the scene, highlighting the positive change in everyone's expressions. Maya, gathering her courage, finally spoke up. "Mr. Statham," she said softly, "thank you for helping us keep our home." Her simple words carried the pure gratitude that only children can express, cutting through any remaining tension in the room. The action star's response was gentle, focused entirely on making the young girl feel heard and valued. Lucas, following his sister's lead, added his own quiet thank you, his small voice carrying the weight of a child's relief at knowing his world would remain stable. Statham knelt down to the children's level, speaking to them with the same respect he had shown the adults, ensuring they understood that their feelings mattered too. Sarah watched this interaction with fresh tears in her eyes, but these were different from the tears of fear she had shed earlier. These were tears of gratitude, of relief, of renewed faith in human kindness. The morning sun caught them as they fell, turning them into tiny prisms of light. Wheeler, witnessing this scene, seemed to undergo a final transformation. The human impact of his business decisions had been made undeniably clear, personified in the grateful faces of two children who would now get to keep their home. His professional manner remained, but it was now tempered with genuine compassion. As the group prepared to leave, Statham made one final gesture. He left his personal contact information, not just for emergencies, but as a reminder that the community looks after its own. His connection to the neighborhood wasn't just about remembering his roots, it was about actively maintaining those connections, about using his success to help others. The morning had grown warmer, both literally and metaphorically. The threat of eviction had been replaced by a solid plan for the future, one that took into account both business realities and human needs. Statham's intervention had created more than just a solution, it had created understanding. Sarah stood straighter now, her earlier fear replaced by renewed confidence. The payment plan was manageable, the immediate crisis averted, but more importantly, her dignity had been preserved. She wasn't receiving charity, she was being given a fair chance to overcome temporary difficulties. The children's faces showed the relief that only comes when young minds realize their world isn't going to fall apart after all. Their hero worship of Statham had transformed into something more meaningful, an understanding that real heroism often comes in quiet moments of standing up for what's right. Wheeler gathered his papers, but his movements were different now, less bureaucratic, more human. The morning's events had reminded him that behind every property management decision were real people, real lives, real consequences. His professional manner remained, but it was now informed by compassion. As they prepared to leave the apartment, Statham's final words carried the weight of someone who truly understood both success and responsibility. "Sometimes," he said, looking at Wheeler but speaking to everyone present, "the best business decision is the one that remembers we're all human first." The morning sun illuminated the small group as they made their way down the building stairs. What had started as a confrontation had transformed into a kind of alliance, different people from different backgrounds finding common ground in human dignity and compassion. Neighbors who had gathered to watch the earlier confrontation now saw something else, a celebrity using his influence not for show, but for genuine positive change. The phones recording the scene captured not just a famous face, but a moment of real human connection and understanding. Sarah's thankful words were met with Statham's quiet assertion that this was simply what neighbors should do for each other. His fame and success hadn't disconnected him from the reality of life in these streets. If anything, it had strengthened his commitment to making a difference where he could. The children's final waves goodbye to their action hero carried none of the earlier fear that had marked their morning. Instead, they had witnessed something more powerful than any movie scene. They had seen real courage, real kindness, real change happen right in their own home. As the morning continued to unfold, the impact of what had transpired began to spread through the neighborhood. Stories of Statham's intervention would be shared, but the real message wasn't about celebrity intervention. It was about the power of standing up for what's right, about remembering the human element in every situation. The sunrise that had earlier illuminated a family in crisis now shone on a very different scene. Hope had replaced fear, understanding had overcome rigid business logic, and humanity had triumphed over cold calculations. The morning light seemed to bless this transformation, highlighting the best in everyone involved. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from, and share your own stories of unexpected kindness that changed everything. Have you ever been helped by a stranger when you needed it most? Or have you been the one to step in and make a difference? Don't forget to like and subscribe for more true stories that remind us of the power of human kindness and standing up for what's right. Remember, sometimes the most powerful moments aren't the dramatic scenes from movies, but the quiet acts of compassion that change real lives.